99% of financial advice is a flat-out lie designed to keep you trapped on a hamster wheel. They tell you to skip the lattes, clip the coupons, and automatically dump 10% of your paycheck into an index fund for 40 years. But here is the brutal truth nobody wants to admit. You cannot save your way to true freedom. If you're relying solely on your active income to get rich, you're playing a losing game against inflation. True wealth doesn't happen gradually. It happens at one exact mathematical tipping point, a moment where the laws of financial gravity completely flip. It's called the $300,000 crossover. Now hold on, before your internal skepticism kicks in, let's clear the air. When I say your money officially out-earns your job, I'm not telling you that the second you cross $300,000, you can walk into your boss's office, quit on the spot, and spend the rest of your days sipping drinks on a beach in Bali. That is the dangerous fantasy financial gurus sell you to get clicks. We're not talking about taking this money out of your portfolio to pay your rent tomorrow. If you pull it out to spend it, you kill the machine. What we're talking about is velocity inside the account. We're talking about the moment where the growth rate of your capital moves faster than the sweat equity of human labor. And if you're sitting there watching this right now with $15,000 or $50,000 in your net worth, do not turn this video off thinking this is a rich person's game. This video is not a victory lap for people who have already made it. This is your exact structural roadmap. The biggest reason people burn out in personal finance is because they feel like they're running at a wall, saving month after month and seeing minimal results. They quit right before the magic happens. Today, I'm giving you the exact target map so you can navigate that agonizing, boring middle phase and understand exactly what you're building toward. Before I show you the tactical blueprint to get there, we have to look at the cold, hard, raw numbers. Let's look at the calculator and look at reality. Let's strip away the hype, the motivational speeches, and the cliches. Let's look at the pure math. Historically, the broad U.S. stock market, represented by low-cost index funds tracking the S&P 500, or the total stock market, has delivered an average annual nominal return of right around 9% to 10% over long investment horizons. Let's apply that historical benchmark to a portfolio that has achieved a balance of $300,000. Portfolio growth equals $300,000 times 10% equals $30,000. On paper, that looks like a neat statistic, but let's translate that number into what it actually means for a regular person working a 9-to-5 job. Let's say you make a standard median salary of $70,000 a year. After federal, state, and local taxes, your take-home pay might hover around $53,000. Now, subtract rent or mortgage payments, groceries, car insurance, utilities, student loans, and a very modest lifestyle. If you are incredibly disciplined, you might manage to save 28% of your net income, which comes out to exactly $15,000 a year in cold, hard surplus cash. Saving $15,000 a year requires real sacrifice. It means saying no to vacations, driving an older vehicle, and meal prepping on Sundays. You have to physically trade your time, energy, and mental health for 50 weeks a year to harvest that $15,000 stack of cash. Now, look back at your $300,000 portfolio. At a standard 10% market return, that quiet, passive pool of capital generates $30,000 of growth in a single year. Do you see the staggering asymmetry here? Your portfolio generated $30,000 while you were sleeping, commuting, hanging out with friends, and watching movies. Meanwhile, your physical, active human labor generated a net savings surplus of $15,000. Your money is now working twice as hard as your physical labor. The capital velocity has completely outpaced your capacity to save. You are no longer the primary driver of your net worth progression. Your money is. But I know what the analytical viewers are saying right now. Hey, you aren't accounting for the inflation tax or capital gains. Excellent. Let's strip out the hype completely and run the ultra-conservative numbers to satisfy the cynics. Let's drop that nominal 10% return down to a conservative 7% to fully adjust for inflation. Let's look at what happens to the math when we look at pure, real purchasing power. Real inflation-adjusted growth is equal to $300,000 times 7% equals $21,000. Even when you factor in a heavy inflation penalty, your portfolio is creating $21,000 of pure, real, inflation-adjusted purchasing power every 12 months. That $21,000 still fundamentally crushes the $15,000 you labor-compressed yourself to save. It has achieved an escape velocity. Now, let's address the second biggest anxiety, market volatility. What happens if you hit your hard-earned $300,000 crossover milestone, and the very next month the market suffers a brutal 20% correction? Your account balances plunge on screen to $240,000. It looks like a disaster. You feel a pit in your stomach. But this is where retail investors get crushed because they don't understand what they actually own. When the market dips, you do not lose a single share of the companies you own. You own the exact same number of slices of the global economic pie. In fact, if you continue automatic investing during that drop, your money is accumulating shares at a steep discount. Historically, every single market crash in U.S. history has ended in a recovery that breaks through to new all-time highs. When the market inevitably recoils and surges back up, that massive accumulation of shares acts like a compressed spring. The rebound triggers an absolute explosion in net worth because your capital base is fully intact. Volatility is not your enemy. It is simply the cost of admission for exponential math.
To understand why so few people ever see this tipping point in real life, you have to understand that building wealth is split into two completely distinct phases with entirely different sets of rules. Phase 1 is the contribution phase. This is the trek from $0 to $100,000. In this phase, compound interest is practically invisible. It is a rounding error. Let's say you have managed to scrape together your first $10,000. You are feeling proud, as you should. But at a 7% real return, that $10,000 only generates an extra $700 over the course of an entire year. $700 doesn't even cover a single month's grocery bill in the modern economy. It feels completely insignificant. During this first phase, 100% of the heavy lifting is driven by your pure human sweat equity, lifestyle sacrifices, and savings rate. It is a grueling uphill slog. You look at your accounts after months of skipping dinners out and brown bagging your lunch, and the needle has barely moved. This brings us to the psychological danger zone, the boring middle trap. This trap typically snaps shut right between the 75,000 and 150,000 milestones. At this exact point, an investor has been grinding for 3, 4, or 5 years. They have accumulated a real sum of money, but the compounding interest still isn't doing anything flashy. A $100,000 portfolio makes about $7,000 in a normal year. It's nice, but it isn't changing your lifestyle. This is exactly where the vast majority of retail investors suffer behavioral failure. They look at their account and say, "I've been sacrificing for half a decade, and for what? $7,000? This personal finance stuff is overhyped. I might as well enjoy my life." So, they take their foot off the gas. They stop automating their savings. Or worse, they liquidate the account to buy a luxury SUV or finance a massive vacation.
Others get impatient and buy speculative meme coins or trade risky options, trying to force the portfolio to grow faster, and they end up blowing up their capital base back to zero. Look at this curve. This is the literal mathematical geometry of compound interest. It does not move in a straight linear path. It is deceptively flat for years, and then it rounds a corner and ascends like a rocket. When you quit or lose focus at $100,000, you are quitting while the curve is still flat. You are enduring all of the pain of the sacrifice without staying long enough to receive any of the rewards of the automation. The autopilot phase only begins to flex its muscles once you clear that $300,000 milestone. At that point, the geometric trajectory shifts. You're no longer pushing the boulder up the mountain. The boulder has topped the peak and is rolling down the other side, picking up massive velocity on its own. Your core objective is to shorten the time it takes to get through that flat zone. If the middle phase is boring and psychologically dangerous, your primary goal should be to spend as little time there as humanly possible. You want to compress the timeline from $0 to $300,000 from a 15-year drag down to a tight, aggressive window. To do that, you need to execute 3 non-negotiable tactical moves. Move 1. Aggressive automation, the Capture First protocol. The greatest enemy to your portfolio hitting escape velocity is your own brain. If you receive your paycheck, spend money on your lifestyle, and plan to invest whatever is left over at the end of the month, I can guarantee you right now that nothing will ever be left over. Parkinson's law dictates that your expenses will always expand to equal your income. You must implement the Capture First protocol.
The day your income hits your bank account, a predetermined aggressive percentage is automatically pulled out and deployed directly into your broad market index funds before you ever have a chance to see it, touch it, or think about it. You remove human emotion, willpower, and decision fatigue from the equation entirely. If you have to manually transfer money every month, you will eventually find an excuse to skip a month. Automation turns your wealth building into an automated utility bill that you pay to your future self. The financial industry wants you to believe that the path to $300,000 requires complexity. They want you to buy expensive mutual funds with 1% management fees, pick individual tech stocks, or trade complex structural options. Why? Because complexity makes Wall Street rich on transaction fees and expense ratios. Every dollar you pay in fees or lose in bad active trades is a gallon of fuel drained directly from your compounding engine. The cost of complexity. A seemingly tiny 1% annual management fee can quietly cannibalize over 20% of your total lifetime portfolio value due to the lost compounding potential of those lost dollars. To compress your timeline, your core portfolio should be incredibly unsexy. You want a low-cost, ultra-broad market index framework, such as an ETF tracking the S&P 500 or a total stock market index fund with an expense ratio near 0.03%. You don't need to guess which individual company will win the next decade. By owning the entire index, you automatically own a piece of every massive wealth generator on Earth. When you own the whole market, your only job is to buy consistently and let the compounding engine run smoothly without friction. Let's be completely honest. You can only cut so many lattes and brown bag so many lunches before you hit an absolute baseline. You cannot frugal your way to $300,000 if your income is completely eaten up by basic survival costs. To compress the timeline, you must look at the revenue side of your personal balance sheet. You need to scale your income through career promotions, changing companies, upskilling, or building a high-margin side hustle. But here is where almost everyone fails. When their income goes up, their lifestyle matches it step for step. You get a $10,000 raise, and suddenly you decide you need a higher rent apartment, a newer car payment, and premium subscription services. This is called lifestyle creep, and it is financial quicksand. When you successfully scale your income, you must maintain your baseline standard of living for just a few focused years.
Every single dollar of that new raise shouldn't touch your lifestyle. It should be routed directly into the Capture First protocol. This creates an acceleration zone that can slash your time spent in the boring middle by 50%. Now, let's talk about the ultimate emotional payoff. Let's look at why we push through the sacrifice, why we automate, and why we fight so hard to cross this specific $300,000 line. It isn't about numbers on a phone screen. It's about a concept known as coast fire. Let's look at the incredible math of what happens if you hit that $300,000 milestone early in your life, let's say at age 32. Imagine that the day you cross $300,000, you make a radical decision. You decide you will never contribute another single penny of your own paycheck to your retirement accounts for the rest of your life. You completely stop saving. You stop sacrificing. You spend every dollar you earn from your job on your current lifestyle, travel, and passions. Let's see what happens to that $300,000 over the next 33 years as you age from age 32 to the standard retirement age of 65, assuming that historical, conservative 6.5% real, inflation-adjusted return. Future value equals $300,000 times 1 plus 0.065 to the 33rd power. Let's run that calculation. Without you ever adding a single dime of your own salary, that $300,000 naturally compounds into roughly $2.4 million in today's pure inflation-adjusted purchasing power by the time you reach age 65. Think about the sheer weight of that realization. The moment you clear the $300,000 crossover point, the existential dread of aging broke is permanently deleted from your life. Your traditional retirement is no longer a stressful question mark. It is a solved mathematical certainty. The machine will finish the job completely on autopilot while you live your life. This triggers a massive, near-instant psychological shift in how you view your career and your time. Before hitting this crossover point, you're trapped. You're forced to stay in that soul-crushing, high-stress corporate job because you desperately need the excess cash flow to build your nest egg from scratch. You tolerate the toxic boss, the brutal commute, and the late-night emails because you're running away from financial vulnerability. But once you cross the $300,000 crossover point, you're entirely free. Because your retirement is already completely funded by past compounding, your current job only needs to cover your immediate basic day-to-day living expenses. You can confidently downshift your career. You can step away from the corporate ladder. You can take a lower-paying job that brings you genuine joy, fulfillment, or creativity. You can move to part-time schedule, transition into teaching, or take a massive risk on starting that entrepreneurial business you've dreamed about for years. You no longer work for survival. You work for fulfillment. The $300K crossover buys back your options, your autonomy, and your peace of mind years ahead of schedule. At the end of the day, the $300K crossover is the great financial equalizer. The stock market doesn't care about where you went to school, what your background is, or how smart you think you are. It is completely blind to your identity. The market only cares about the raw math of consistency, capital base, and asset velocity. Getting through that initial contribution phase is hard work. It requires discipline, focus, and a willingness to look foolish to people who are busy spending everything they make to look rich today. But once you cross that line, the laws of wealth flip completely in your favor. Now that you know the exact math behind how the $300K crossover works, your next step is to figure out exactly where you stand on the path and identify the clear structural markers that prove your portfolio is actually ahead of the crowd.